It should come as no surprise that one of the pitfalls of smoking, talking for hours at a time, is dry mouth.
Well, fortunately for us and for you, Flint's mouthwatering mints has become a staple in the studio.
Flint's not only has a flavor for everyone's taste, but each flavor has its own level of mouth-watering effectiveness.
Now, that effect comes from the spilanthy flower, which is native to the Amazon.
You think Teddy Roosevelt ever tried any of that when he was on his little rafting trip down the river?
I'd like to think he did. And now, you can all get the same experience, that thrill, but, minus the whole malaria thing.
Whether you want to get a little moist with their cool watermelon, damp with their delicious mint, or full-on soaked with cinnamon ginger, one of my personal favorites, they've got something for everyone.
Don't let dry mouth derail your holiday season and give the gushing gift that you and yours will actually enjoy and use.
All the way up until January 3rd, if you order now from www.flintswith2ts.com and use the promo code HHPOD, you will receive 15% off your order. That's flintsmints.com, HHPOD.
What are you guys waiting for? HHPod, flints.com, get on it. All right, everybody, relax. The Pope isn't dead. Well, actually, we're recording this and it's going to come out in about 3 to 4 weeks. So
maybe.
I hope we didn't just actually put that out in the world.
Yeah,
I don't want that kind of fucking heat coming down on us.
No, that if he goes away, that's not us. That's not on us. That was an act of God, you'd say.
That's what we can blame it on.
And now that you're here, all of our children, we'll make an exception instead of being the...
we're going to be talking about the Vatican. I don't know if we should be mentioning children.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good point. Yeah, that's a scary thought. Maybe for one episode, instead of being the Cush College, we can be the Chronic Church.
We could be the Cathedral of Chronic.
I like that. That sounds good to me. This week, we decided to choose a city that is a nation that is the smallest nation that's recognized in the world, or smallest country that's recognized in the world. And it's so secretive because it's run by a church.
Yeah. It's literally, you're supposed to have a separation of church and state, unless you are a church that is a state unto yourself. Little disclaimer on this. We're going to try to go ahead and stay within the realm of understanding that people believe in different things. But here's the deal. If you do happen to believe in something and it does have holes in it, we're going to dive into those. We're going to get all up in those holes. And we tend to be fair when we do that. We've done it when we explore colonization, when we explore anything to do with the Spanish. Many, many times go back through the catalog. We have just torn through the United States government and all that kind of shit that they've done. So naturally, our attention is going to focus at some point on kind of the OG clandestine, secretive, we don't know what the fuck they're really doing institution in the world.
Dude, what are they up to? Why so much secrecy? I think secrecy in one aspect is a good thing, but at the same time, it also kind of makes you wonder. And these are just questions that we have about the Vatican City and kind of the Catholic Church more as a whole. Like Chris said, you can believe in what you want to believe in. We support your right to believe in whatever you want to believe in, unless you're like a Nazi or something like that. But at the same time, you have to be able to understand that people are going to have questions. I did 18 years in the Mormon Church. I was in there deep, real deep. Not going on a mission deep, and it kind of started to wear off in my early to late teens. But at the same time, there was always a little bit of a tie to it, and I used to feel the same way when I would hear somebody at school bashing the Mormon Church. I didn't like it, I didn't know it, and I didn't understand why they were doing it. Once that shine kind of rubbed off and I started to have those same questions too, I walked away from the church. That was my decision. If you believe in everything that goes on and you have a reasoning for it in your mind that you believe and that can convince you, that's great. We support the shit out of that. Religion has done some awful, awful things in the world, but at the same time, religion has helped people fight the strongest ills of the world. I mean, addiction's probably one of the worst things that you can go through, right?
Yeah.
And religion has saved many people from addiction.
people also have religious addiction as well.
Yeah, but you're replacing one thing with another that's not
Exactly.
going to kill you.
Correct. It might bankrupt you.
True.
But it's not going to kill you. The man over there on the mic to my left, that's Professor Adam. I am Professor Chris. Rate, review, subscribe, follow us on all our socials. They'll actually be down in the episode description, then at the end of the episode. I guess without further ado, let's get into Catholic Disneyland, the Vatican City.
I went a different direction. You went Catholic Disneyland. I went religious Vice City.
Either or applicable. It's, you know what it is? On the outside, it's Catholic Disneyland. On the inside, it's religious Vice City is what it is.
Within those walls.
So Vatican City, and this episode is going to focus on Vatican City itself. We're not going to jump into Catholicism as a whole. That's fucking enormous. And technically, we're recording on a short week. So you guys get Vatican City, which is still infinitely just entertaining in itself. Vatican City as a country hasn't been around for probably as long as anyone has expected. It actually wasn't recognized as its own kind of nation state country until 1929. It is less than 100 years old, but it has been there in some capacity, and its history dates all the way back essentially almost till, well, basically just a few decades after the crucifixion of Christ. So
A few centuries. There was something a little bit there as far as where the Vatican City was and where it was moved to.
you're right.
But at the same time, it still took a Christian awakening within the kingdom or within the Roman Empire to create the Vatican.
And what's crazy is up to this point, even leading up to the point in which the first Roman emperor Constantine converts to Christianity, before that, it was still a, not monotheistic. What's it when it's a bunch of them?
Polytheistic.
Polytheistic. They're still believing in some iteration of the Greek gods that they then converted over to the Roman gods.
Paganism.
Yeah.
They were all pagans. And this is a point in time where after Jesus, quote unquote, is crucified, I mean no harm by that. It's something that is used as a historical marker that I feel like is more of a religious marker.
I feel like if Hot Topic isn't selling I Love Pagans, they're missing out on.
Yeah, that's a hot shirt. I
Yeah.
like that. But Christianity as a whole is an underground religion. It's actually one of the few times in history that Christianity or that Christians have been persecuted.
They've
And
more than made up for it since.
yes, yeah, they point in all direction. We will have a banging episode on the Crusades.
Yeah.
But they were an underground religion where they were persecuted against, and nobody persecuted them any harder, I don't believe, than Emperor Nero. He reigned from 54 to 68 AD, or CE, Common Era. It's what we usually like to use.
I was going to say we've done enough research that AD is probably the thing that pulled up in every single document or everything you read on this.
Anno Domini, Year of Our Lord, I believe is what it translates
Always
to.
remember it as AD after death.
Yeah, well, that's what we're told because Christianity. But Nero was very, very mean to the Christian population. He was a pagan himself, so any type of Christianity was considered heresy. He actually started something called the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. Excuse me, because he planned to build something that he called the Golden Temple. And he wanted Rome to burn so he could then build the Golden Temple on top of the ashes of the foundations of Rome.
Was he wanting to build sex gardens, is what I heard?
There's he's a deviant man. Somebody that I feel like we could really appreciate the level of deviance this guy was, because supposedly, while this great fire was burning Rome, he was just playing his fiddle. He was just sitting up in his castle, wherever he was, in the emperor's palace, just playing his fiddle.
Is there some type of like, not a motto, but some type of saying about Nero's fiddle or something like that?
Yeah, it's about watching Rome burn while playing the fiddle or
Okay.
something that relates to this. This Great Fire of Rome burned for 9 total days. It burned for 6 straight days before they kind of got it under control, and then it fired back up again. It burned 71% of Rome. I don't know how big the Great Castle or the Golden Palace was supposed. Golden Temple, Jesus, Golden. Sorry, Jesus. How big the Golden Temple was supposed to be, but 71% of Rome feels like it might have got a tad out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And once this happens, Nero decides to blame the Christians for the Great Fire of Rome that he set himself. And in doing so, during the time of blaming the Christians, he would do certain things like he would just go ahead and feed Christians to lions.
Yeah,
And
during gladiatorial games and everything,
Yeah.
that's where it comes from.
if any of you religious folks are familiar with the story of Daniel and the lion's den, this is where that idea sort of comes from. But the Romans were very mean to Christians for a very long time. And we have to go all the way up until, as Chris was alluding to, Constantine, who ruled from 306 to 337 CE. He was riding into a battle of Milvian Bridge in 312. And as Constantine and his horsemen are riding up along, they see a flash across the sky, and it says something in Latin, like, follow me. It's
Wear my symbol and you will conquer, or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, use my symbol and you will conquer. It was a cross that had appeared in the sky. At this time, Rome is essentially kind of divided into this is where like Constantinople and everything comes into play. So you have Constantine ruling from one side, and I think it was his brother or like cousin or something like that was on the other side. But they had this was the battle to determine who was going to rule the Roman Empire.
And Constantine comes out on top. Constantine comes out on top, and he attributes his victory in battle to following Christ.
Well, he had them paint the crosses on him.
And that saved them somehow.
You'd think it would have been an area to aim with arrows.
A target, yeah. Crosshairs. If they had crosshairs back then, they'd line up perfectly.
Yeah.
But along with this whole entire thing that happened, Constantine converts to Christianity. He does something. He extends legal rights to Christians 10 years after this battle. Jesus. Again, sorry, buddy. He extends legal rights to Christians that they didn't have before, so they're able to come out of the shadows. They're able to worship what they want.
And that was the Edict of Milan that he signed the next year, the year after he won the battle.
Okay, yes.
In 1313, that's when he signed the Edict of Milan.
And doesn't make an official religion, but 10 years later, the official religion of the Roman Empire becomes Christianity.
I kind of feel like that's a play to, hey, I just got into the emperor's role. If I get in here, I'm already coming in to an area as well that was probably ruled over by the guy who just had to fight for it.
Yeah.
And if I come in here, I convert to Christianity and I make everybody else convert to Christianity as the official religion of Rome, I might get my ass ousted. I got to have some time in which to essentially kind of ingratiate myself, build a power base here. And then 10 years down the road, then I'll be like, okay, so now everyone has to do what I'm doing.
Yeah. And he jumps kind of right into it because this Edict of Milan that you were talking about happens in 313 CE. And he starts building something called the Old St. Peter's Basilica that was built to house the burial site of St. Peter, who was one of Jesus's apostles. Quick little aside into the religion of that. Peter was one of Jesus's apostles. Jesus had said that he wanted to build his religion upon the rock of Peter. He also told Peter, hey, you're going to deny me 3 times when it comes time for my crucifixion, for my death. And Peter didn't believe him. Peter ends up denying him 3 times, realizes what he did. And
I see it as like an interrogation in like a police room. Like they slam down a picture of Jesus and be like, do you know this man? And he's like, I don't. And he's like, do you fucking know this man? He's like, I swear to God, I don't. He's like, one more time, scumbag. Do you know this motherfucker? And he's like, I don't.
There's a very flowery story in the Bible that I don't remember about how he does it, but
I like mine.
Yeah, it's not too far off without the aggression, I don't think.
I'm sure there was some Roman aggression on there.
Yeah. But Peter ends up being killed by our old buddy Nero, and Peter had decided, Nero had said he wanted to, but apparently Peter had decided that he wanted to be crucified upside down because he didn't feel right after denying Jesus to be killed in the same manner.
Well, you can't skip the pomp of this, of where it happened and how it ties into stuff.
What do you mean?
Okay, so prior to Nero, you had Caligula. And Caligula and Nero.
Caligula was after Nero.
I'm pretty sure Caligula was before Nero because Nero was the one that after he died, that's, I think it was called the Circus of Caligula and Nero. Caligula was first. Either or. You have Nero, Caligula, and Nero. During that time frame, they had built this circus. And basically what the circus was back then, I think we've talked about it during the Constantinople episode, the Circus Maximus was basically the area that they did like the chariot races. It's basically the big, long, track-shaped thing. They had one of those built.
Hippodrome type, right?
Yeah, I think so. So they had this built, and after the fire had happened, they're blaming it on the Christians. They start to do executions basically in this area. Like, I don't know if they're doing it during halftime, during these chariot races or anything, but when it came time for Peter to be crucified, they actually did it. And in the middle of this circus, this horse racing place, they had this huge Egyptian obelisk. And the obelisk had been, this is where I might be getting it. Yeah, it was Caligula first because Caligula is the one that brought it back from Egypt.
From Alexandria or wherever it was?
It was Heliopolis.
Okay.
I think is where it was. He brings back, and this thing is fucking huge. I think it was a 750-ton obelisk.
It's massive.
It's fucking enormous. So I have no idea how they brought it back, if they brought it back in pieces or what they did, but the story of how they move it, because it is the same obelisk that now sits in the center of St. Peter's Square. They crucified Peter underneath that obelisk. And when Constantine came to power, when Peter died, basically they gave his followers back his body, and they basically just had to find a quick place to bury it. Right next to the circus on this hillside was like a pagan graveyard, like a pagan burial site. So they had basically just had to kind of dig a hole and throw Peter in there. Well, when Constantine came in and he demolished the circus, he had them demolish everything, leaving just the obelisk in its place. They had to level off part of the hill that the graveyard was on. So they took out like half the graves on the top half of the hill. But what they did is all of the graves on the lower half, they went ahead and just filled them in and buried them in with like dirt and filler because they were making a foundation that they could essentially build this first St. Peter's Basilica on. Now, since they've built the new St. Peter's Basilica, they've actually done excavations underneath it. And it's fucking weird looking from the pictures. It looks like when you did you ever do the Seattle Underground tour?
No, but I've heard of it before.
Okay, I feel like it's something like that where you're seeing something that should be above ground, but you're seeing it, and it looks like a set, like at Disneyland or something. But they basically have this graveyard that they've dug up and excavated, leaving all the stones and everything in place and just removing all of the filler underneath St. Peter's Basilica right now. If anyone has seen the movie Angels and Demons, it's the one where Tom Hanks decides to go long hair. It's based on the Dan Brown book. He actually has to go under there to like retrieve like an explosive device or something. And you kind of see the excavated, and that's essentially where they believe that Peter was buried. That's the rock upon where the church is going to be built. His tombstone, I guess.
Now I think they're catacombs, aren't they?
They have catacombs. So that's what they call the necropolis.
Yeah.
So they call it the necropolis. So basically you have St. Peter's Basilica. Below that, I believe you have catacombs.
Mm-hmm.
And then below that is where they did all the excavation and everything for the graveyard. And then also the catacombs, I believe, are where previous popes get to be interred, which is crazy that like part of it is that you get to be buried like in the same location of like your prime, well, I guess not prime deity, but like the closest to God that someone that you think is going to get.
Yeah, you're next in line. You had his position just 150
That's true. You know
years
what?
after.
That makes sense because even after I think he was called the first bishop or the first pope post-mortem, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you call that?
Yeah, after he died.
Yeah, but what do they call it when you're awarded posthumously?
Yeah.
So he's posthumously made a pope. the first pope.
When you explain what the necro...
You were going to say necrophilia.
Yeah.
Necropolis.
Yeah, necropolis. Same word.
It's probably where some necrophilia happens. If it's going to happen, it's somewhere probably similar.
But we get this big, giant St. Peter's Basilica that is placed right on top of where they say that Peter is buried. It was pretty big for only being built between 319 and 333. Like, that's 14 years of work that you do. 14 years of work that you do there. That's pretty big still, I think.
I think at the time it was one, if not one of, or two for largest church. I'm checking to see when Notre Dame was built. Maybe they were comparing that one to the new St. Peter's Basilica. I'll look it up.
Potentially. Over the next 12 centuries, the basilica was used for papal coronations. It became a place for pilgrimage, obviously, because now Christianity that was spread by the rest of the apostles that left, and Peter just happened to stay, now have a place to come visit. Charlemagne was crowned emperor
Not
there.
The rapper.
Huh?
Not the rapper.
No, not the god. He was crowned emperor there in 800 CE, and he's known as the first Holy Roman Emperor. So there is where the branch of the Holy Roman Empire gets its first emperor. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about them they'll get their own episode.
Okay.
But even prior to that, the basilica's there. 5th century, his name was Pope Similicus. He builds palaces that are near the old basilica outside of the traditional Laternal Palace that was used by previous popes. Mm-hmm. The Laternal Palace is actually in Rome. It was away from the site of where the basilica was.
Yeah, he wasn't living at the basilica. He had his own pope's residence.
Yeah, even in the area, the pope's residence was like across Rome, so it wasn't that close. So this was more like a traditional thought of a church today where do priests live in the church?
No. So, well, in this case, they have
but like modern day now.
Oh, no, because I think most priests can have families, right?
No.
Wait, which one? Pastors can have families.
Yeah.
I would assume that. Okay, go back to think Always Sunny. Did Matthew live at the church?
He was just going through the priesthood.
I think maybe when they're going through the priesthood, they have to live there like at a seminary or something like. I don't know. I mean, are you envisioning just like a little apartment in the back of the church?
Well, like growing up, the bishops that ran your ward that was at your meeting house, mm-hmm. He didn't live in the meeting house. He had his 9-to-5 job and was outside and lived further away. He also had a family. He could also have a family. Yeah, that's true too. There. So this is the first instance where you kind of see this Vatican type city being built because this palace that was built was actually built in kind of the same footing of where the old basilica is. So you're almost concentrating the religion in that area as opposed to just, the Pope lives across town.
Yeah, if you have a religious emergency and the Pope has to respond like post haste, how long would it take you to get across town in like ancient Rome?
So far. I love that you bring that up because we're going to fast forward to 846 when land pirates had attacked the basilica and destroyed St. Peter's tomb. They then pillaged the shrines. I would assume that they would have had some basic knowledge of what was inside the basilica and knew how important it was. So I don't know how they would have known that.
I think when they probably say, because the way that it's set up now, they have I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's the big pergola thing.
Oh, over the tomb?
Yeah, what is that called?
It starts with a D, doesn't it? Dracus?
Baldacchino?
Yes.
Baldacchino. So you have that, which is supposed to signify the church as a whole being over the burial site of Peter. Mm-hmm. But then if you go into it further, you walk the other half mile into the church because this thing is fucking massive. When you walk to the back, that's where they have like the tomb or the shrine of Peter. I don't know if there's anything in it, but I would imagine that because they hadn't excavated anything at this point, they weren't rating the actual like in the ground tomb because they didn't even know for the longest time where that even was because of the testing.
This is still the old one, though.
That's what I mean.
The original site.
So it hadn't even been excavated yet. So all of it was just built above. So they probably had a shrine or a tomb, like a symbolic tomb.
You don't know. Maybe they just found some bones and threw it in there.
What I'm saying is if they're going to steal something, I would assume that when they design this, based upon how they build the next St. Peter's Basilica, that the tomb had a shit ton of valuable stuff on it. It was probably like inlaid with gold and all this kind of stuff. I don't think they're going to be going after bones or dirt at that point. I think they're just going after the valuables, and that included what they had as the symbolic tomb.
Well, and they were probably under the same belief of like sarcophaguses down in Egypt. Those guys were buried with a ton of gold and jewels and shit like that.
But they couldn't get down there at the time. It was all still filled.
But there was still a tomb that was up top in the old basilica.
It had nothing in it, I don't think.
Again, like I'm saying though, wouldn't you break that open to see?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna check just to make sure that.
Oh yeah, when they stole everything off of it, they checked everything.
Yeah,
sure. They're land pirates, man. Come on.
That's what I'm saying. You're breaking open the tomb to see if he's wearing anything inside there.
Yeah.
If he's got a gold chain or.
But there's nothing
like
in there.
Yeah. No,
okay.
I don't know if there was or not. There wasn't when they came back.
Yeah.
So, in response to that, 848, the Leonine Wall is started as a means to protect Vatican Hill and to encircle the newly renovated basilica. After the land pirates had come through and torn shit up, they were renovating that as they were building this wall.
Also, that's where it gets its name. Vatican City is actually just named off the area that it's at, and it's Vatican Hill.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, I had no idea that this happened. From 1309 to 1377, there was like 5 French popes in a row, I think, or 3 maybe, somewhere 5 or 3.
Yeah.
They were French, and so they moved this papal residence where the Pope lives and kind of where the inner workings, the headquarters of the church are, to Avignon, France. I have never really thought about where popes come from. I think the guy now is from like Argentina or something like that.
Yeah, they're much more, well, and you got to think of at this time, with the church still being the central power of that church being around Vatican City and everything, it's spreading, but at that time, stuff spread slow. It was making its way probably further west along the Silk Road.
So do you think it was a move to put a French pope in to try to spread the church within France and grow the population?
I don't see how that couldn't have been a benefit of it.
Yeah.
Wanting to give everybody a little bit of representation. I think there is some of that today where they want to make everybody feel like maybe at one point or another. There hasn't been an American pope, I don't think. Do you think they play that by like how long you've been a major player, like a major religion in the country?
You'd think once they realized that the United States was king, though, the next one that would come in would be somebody from the U.S. Even an Italian that came from Italy that can trace his lineage back to Romans that's now living in the United States, like something along those lines.
You'd
think
have
they
to
would
meet a certain
pitch.
criteria, but I think because also Italy being right there next to France, being so close, that it was probably kind of maybe throwing them a little bit of a bone. And also the fact that maybe there was more French influence in it at that time because Catholicism, Christianity had grown more. They were receiving a little bit more donations from the French. And yeah, for what years were those?
1309 to 1377.
Okay, I got my dates mixed up, but I was gonna be like, it might have been like the Napoleon effect. Is like as he gets in power, he's like, you should really have a French pope. That comes later.
Pope Gregory XI ends up moving the papacy back to Rome in 1377, but he doesn't move it back to Rome. He goes ahead and moves it into the Vatican City. So now the church is whole because the Pope is living in Vatican City with the basilica that is in just a terrible state of disarray.
Do you know how the popes pick their names?
Based upon old saints?
Yeah, so it's Catholic popes will change their names for, a couple different reasons. It's either to, like you said, honor a saint or even a previous pope. it'll kind of also indicate they find it to be like, I'm getting into this new life. And so they do it kind of as a rebrand. But they also do it because it can send a message about what type of pope they're going to be.
Yeah, it's the same thing as the monarchy and all the King Henrys and Edwards and that kind of a thing.
But they're old enough to know at that time because they can change their name, because those guys were actually just named Richard and Henry and everything.
Yeah.
They changed their name because if they want to send a message that I'm going to be, more simplistic or more frugal, or, one pope might have been really, forward thinking or want to establish a lot of change, they would name themselves so they kind of had an expectation about like what the new regime was going to be about.
Gregory had to have been a first decent initial pope if he has 11 guys.
And then you get Pius that has a bunch, which I feel like that's a cheat. Also,
Pius wasn't an actual guy, was he? It was just the name of being more religious than everybody else? Or
No,
was Pius
like-
just
there
more
was like-
religious than everybody else?
that's what I'm thinking. Did the word pious, meaning extremely devout and religious, did that come about because there was a Pope Pius, and then the word just came about, or did the Pope be like, that name means something, so I'm going to go ahead and take that name?
Yeah, that's, I don't know. We'd have to
I'm finding that out.
find a Catholic or Google.
I'm going to trust Google.
So they were in charge of an area just through sheer growth and numbers of an area called the Papal States. They were a group of territories that were controlled by the Pope, so he was not only the leader of the church, but he was also kind of like the de facto ruler of the land. And this was more in northern Italy, where they were still not necessarily unified, but at least the empire was more solidly intact up there, maybe you would say. Because the Roman Empire wasn't around still. But they might have just stayed more true to the religion.
Yeah, maybe it had a little bit more, because when the whole thing with the revolution to unify Rome came about, it was more of like the southern portions of Rome that were kind of trying to take over those areas. Maybe because the revolution was maybe born down south, it had started to take root there more often, and because technically they did have, the church and everything like that, and obviously a pretty sizable portion, judging by the string of French popes, maybe they had a better power base being next to France right there.
Probably.
With Pius, so the word Pius came first, which means it's Latin. Pius, how we spell it, Pious, comes from the Latin word pious, Pius, which means dutiful. So the word came before they took it as a title for Pope, but that seems like that's almost too on the nose. Like, I'm Pope dutiful.
Yeah, a little bit.
And then there were 12 more Pope dutifuls.
Well, piety is a great thing to have if you're going to be the Pope.
It's like Johnson. It's like having the middle name, like, my name is Mark Big Dick Johnson.
It's a nickname.
Yeah, I mean,
He's
technically,
Carl Pius.
All I'm saying is that if you're giving yourself that name, you might not be that pious.
Oh, you got some high expectations of yourself. There's not a lot of humility in naming yourself Pius. But the old basilica had fallen into just terrible disrepair. Pope Nicholas V reigned from 1447 to 1455, kind of starts to look at it and say, we need to do some massive renovations here. Maybe let's not tear it down, but maybe let's kind of start to refashion this and maybe change the layout of it.
Let's give the old girl a facelift.
There were a lot of very confusing and frankly extremely boring arguments about the new design as to whether I believe it was like a Greek cross or a Roman cross that they wanted the interior to be fashioned after.
I want to say something like a Latin cross or a Roman cross. So a Roman cross is literally a plus symbol. It's equal. It's equal parts on all. It's a symmetrical cross. Whereas like a Latin cross is what you would recognize as a crucifix if you're holding it up longer at the bottom and then everything at the top. So yeah, there was an argument about that because I think the original one was a Latin cross. It was longer, and then it had the two wings off the side. You also have to imagine at this point too, with that thing being built back in like, what'd you say, 36 or 333, 336?
Yeah.
We're all the way up to like the, 1400s almost. And you're like, oh, building technology has probably come a long way.
Ton. Yeah,
And
for sure.
for a building to have been standing for at that point, is that 1,000 years?
Yeah.
That's a fucking 1,000 years. How that thing is even still standing.
Yeah. Stuff was, it's just all stone. I mean,
Yeah.
mountains stand for forever too. The level of balance that it had, though, is so tough to believe that's why it had to have been in pretty bad shape
Yeah.
for them to just
You're
think.
also not building it with the materials at the time. You're building it with the knowledge of how to structurally engineer something
Yeah.
to distribute weight and load and all that stuff.
The arguments over the design caused just so many boring delays. Pope Julius II reigned from 1503 to 1513. He planned his own tomb inside of this new basilica that they're going to build.
I love the name Pope Julius because it sounds like a pimp's name.
I like Julius just in general. Any Julius I'm a big fan of. Love orange too.
Does it always go back to Pulp Fiction? Samuel Jackson's character? Because if you just close your eyes and like it's Pope Julius, he's like, say my name, motherfucker.
Mine's always Julius Irving. But
okay, there you go. Both excellent Juliuses.
Yeah. This is interesting to me, and I think you're really going to enjoy this little turnabout that we're going to pull here, because Pope Julius II was actually the one that instituted something called the Swiss Guard.
So, if you've ever seen videos, pictures of, if you've ever seen the movie Euro Trip, it's a fucking masterpiece of
Great
cinematic
movie.
brilliance. It's hilarious. Yeah. Matt Damon, Scotty doesn't know, look it up. So, the reason that the Swiss Guard was selected is the same reason that they wanted to establish Vatican City, the Papal States, where they could also operate as essentially a religion, is they wanted to rule themselves, so they never had to be beholden to essentially another ruler or king and feel pressured to, push that or try to like endorse someone or anything like that. Really weird reason, considering is like, no, this is the reason that we need to have our own kingdom. This is just because we can't show loyalty to anyone. We're a religion. And so who are you going to pick to be your guard if you're wanting to maintain neutrality? It's going to be the most well-known neutralicists.
Okay, close, yeah.
Neutral country makers, the Swiss. And so at the time that the Swiss Guard was brought in, you're given the full Swiss regalia and the colorful shit and the baggy pants and the fucking 7-foot halberds that you're wearing and the berets and all that stuff. And just because everything is supposed to stay traditional and look like it's been consistent with Vatican City and the church and everything, you just don't fucking have them ever update themselves or change.
What was on the top of the halberds? It was like an axe head.
Yeah, a halberd is basically a spear with an axe right below the spear.
Just a crazy looking instrument that they said the Swiss Guard could also use from horseback. Think about somebody swinging a 7-foot axe at you from horseback.
I honestly might not be that concerned if they're riding at me in the Vatican with the marble floors and all of the pavers, because that horse tries to make any turn whatsoever. And that thing's slipping.
It's a one-way ticket to
that
ancient
guy's
glue
going
factory.
into the fucking pavement. Yeah. What's funny too is, of course, that's not all they're trained with nowadays. They still use those traditional weapons for like ceremonial purposes and everything, and that's the weapons that you see them with. But they're literally trained like the fucking Secret Service with like weapons and all that kind of stuff as well.
Pretty badass, and it sounds like the Swiss Army or the Swiss wherever they got the Swiss Guard from. Pretty badass people. Very interesting lives that these guys lead. We'll get into that a little bit later when we start talking about some of the current day facts of the Vatican City. Oh, that's the wrong board.
I gotcha. So Pope Julius II ends up deciding, he's like, listen, enough wasting time. What we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and knock down the old St. Peter's Basilica, and we're going to start new construction immediately on it. So they demo in 1505, and new construction happens almost immediately starting in April 1506. And the plans for this, while they're deciding and they make the decision to demolish the old one, they're pretty much going to all of the most well-known architects and engineers and painters of the time, all the Renaissance men. And this is where a couple big names are going to come in as far as like design and things like that. Some you know, some you don't know. But they started in 1506. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and then we're going to backtrack, because what we're going to cover as far as the construction of this takes place over the course of about 120 years, because it's not finished until 1626. Now, if you've ever seen images, Adam has actually been to Vatican City and has been in St. Peter's Basilica. So I've been just like fanboying over him for the last week about like, I don't get the scope of the size, and I don't think pictures do a good job of showing the size of it, but it's massive on a scale that's almost kind of too hard to believe until I think you do see it in person. The dome itself, the area, can fit the Statue of Liberty in it with the torch not meeting the top of the dome. It could fit that inside it. I think someone said, I was doing some research, they said it could fit, I think, like 2 or 3 737s in it as far as the length of it goes.
I think it's 320,000 square feet.
Yeah, it's enormous. It can hold, if people are standing, it has room for 60,000. If they're seated, it can still hold 20,000 people.
Man.
And not only structurally is this thing just insanely impressive, the layout of Vatican City, I mean, it's taken up, the centerpiece is St. Peter's Basilica. Also, some people might not know this, St. Peter's Basilica and the inside of that is different than the Sistine Chapel. They're actually separate buildings. Sistine Chapel looks small compared to St. Peter's Basilica, but then you go inside the Sistine Chapel and look up and see how tall it actually is, and it just provides even more scope for how big the basilica is. But the way you were talking about it, how just intricately everything is carved and just done perfectly, the baldacchino or whatever it is that like signifies it is this insanely massive like bronze pergola overhang area that stands in the middle, like right underneath, I think, the oculus of the top of the dome, the center of the dome.
Rotunda?
Yeah, or whatever it's called, the baldacchino or whatever.
Yeah.
But then every single surface area that you can possibly see is covered by these gorgeous frescoes.
Frescoes, mosaics, anything that they could do to just spice up these walls. And the frescoes are, I mean, they're paintings.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you see one, it just feels different. Like there's just something about knowing that that's just put on the wall and can't be moved, and it's just there for all of time.
And not only that, but like if you're in a museum and you're looking at paintings, you see a painting and you walk down at 10 feet and you see another painting. When you're looking at covering almost every single surface and trying to imagine how much work that took for the artist to do that, and not just that, but structurally how to build this dome to actually, like, you know, structurally support itself, and just kind of the engineering and everything that went into that when they were first deciding to build this, the decision between the Latin cross and the Roman cross, even deciding on that plan as to how to actually build it and what that would take structurally.
Full disclosure, when I did get to go over and see the Vatican City, I was still figuring out the intricacies of the Italian drinking laws and the age to be able to drink. So I think I was like 16 maybe.
So you could drink.
Yeah. So I went through this a little bit buzzed, but just the grandeur of this place. And there's 3 entrances that the public are allowed to go through. I believe it's the museum. There is the one that walks you right into St. Peter's Square, which is kind of a misnomer because it's more of a circle.
Yeah.
And I forgot what the third one is. It might be through a church. But you walk in, we came in through into the square, and when we talk about kind of modern day what the Vatican City is now, it's just a sea of people that are there as tourists. But back then, everybody was just there. Like, people still go to the Vatican City on pilgrimage now. Back then, that was like 95% of the people that were there.
Yeah.
So
no one's taking selfies back then.
No,
Yeah.
everybody was there to just take sight of these frescoes and everything else and go see the tomb. So there was no wasted space inside the new basilica, and that's why it takes 120 years, because when every wall is adorned with a fresco or a mosaic or a painting, or you have this big giant dome that actually has steps that lead up to it. How tall did you say it was?
Total height for the dome. So just to kind of break it down, and again, we'll go back. So it's 720 feet long, 490 feet, so almost 500 feet wide, 448, I'm going to say 450 feet tall as far as the dome goes. And then the inside diameter, and I always have to fucking look this up because I can never remember. Diameter is straight across.
Okay.
Adam just did his finger in a
circumference.
Circle.
Is what that one is.
I always confuse. And then you have the one that just goes half. And I can't remember what that one's called. The radius?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe. So the diameter is side to side. The interior portions of the dome, the diameter is 136 feet. It's fucking massive. And again, that's why it takes over 100 years to do this, in addition to everything else that's completed. Several different people are brought in as the designers. You have, I love doing the Italian accent on this, Donatello Bremente. You have Michelangelo, Carlo Moderno. And then the piazza and the square was actually Gian Bernini, who actually designed that. And so
the greatest minds of the time
exactly
are being used to do this.
Yeah, all the Renaissance guys. So you also have, when they're building this, they're also building like the papal residence and like the apartments and everything like that for where the Pope is going to stay and everybody that's going to be living in Vatican City. So once they get done with the basilica itself, it goes over to Bernini, and they're like, well, now we need you to design essentially this big gathering area where people can come and, you know, listen to the Pope speak. So he basically is limited. He's like, but the papal residence is over here, and we're definitely not tearing that down because we put so much money into that. And so you're going to need to work within these confines. So that's why instead of right off the front of the basilica, you don't just get the giant circle, the rotunda or whatever it is. It's why it comes in as almost like a trapezoid, where it starts to actually pinch in. He said he did that because of the space. Then he took two circles and kind of overlapped them to give him the shape of the radius. And then all of like everything was so strategically done from a visual perspective. They have the area that circles out and then comes around to meet. They said it almost looks like arms like reaching out and like holding the people that are within it. And the columns that support that entire area that goes around, there's 4 columns, but they said when you're standing and you look out, the columns go down in size just enough from the ones you see standing in the square to the back that you only see one column. So
are we sure that this isn't just what you need to make this architecturally sound, and then we might have come in and just put a little bit of our own spin on it?
I think Bernini came in, he's like, I'm going to fucking piazza the shit out of this place.
You think? I figured just architecturally it has to look a certain way to be able to carry the load of that big giant dome.
No. This is the piazza area.
Oh, okay.
This is
gotcha.
the area that goes around the piazza, like the loop that goes around.
In the square.
In the square itself, yeah. And then I think they said around the entire square and also on the top of the basilica are these like 3 meter, like 9 foot statues of, and I didn't look up who the statues were of. We need to look that up. But basically, and then to get the obelisk into place, the Pope at that time, still being, I believe it was Julius, was like, we're going to take this obelisk that is basically the focal point of the martyrdom of Peter, and we're going to put that right in the middle of the square. And they couldn't take this thing apart. Again, this is like a 750-ton obelisk. Can't take the thing apart. And so they put out basically a fucking ad to everyone in Rome, and it's like, who could come up with the best design and the best plan to actually move this thing? And it only had to move 300 meters because they had built it so close to the area that it was in the circus.
Yeah.
So this guy ends up winning the contest and designs basically this rig that is this huge scaffolding that goes up and is as tall as the obelisk, and it's built around the obelisk itself. So as they build this, they're building it at the bottom of a ramp because it has to move up a little bit, and it's a 300-meter ramp. They build this, and as they get it constructed, they basically form a wooden frame tightly around the obelisk itself to hold it together, and then strap it, and then put a whole bunch of straps and basically use a pulley system to lower the front of it down so it's tipping down, and then it swings the back of it up to where now it's being carried like in a cradle.
How do you think they built that wood cage? How do you think they fastened the wood cage together? Did they have nails? Romans had nails.
Yeah, they had, 100%.
Okay.
They had masonry tools and everything, so they would have to have. So it took 900 men. I think they said 36 or 37 days, 144 horses, and how they moved this thing, because it wasn't like we had to move and then keep moving locations.
Yeah.
You know those things you see on pirate ships that they use to bring up the anchor? They're essentially the wheels that people are pushing around in a circle.
Uh-huh.
They had a shit ton of those all over the place, like all out in front of the sled. And those 900 guys were sitting there manning these wheels, and they had ropes attached to the wooden structure. And it basically used all of these things. And they said some of the hemp rope was literally like in circumference. I think they said some of it was like 2 feet in circumference of hempen rope that they had to use because this thing was so fucking heavy, and had to winch the thing up. And then when it got into position where they were going to set it, which is the location that it's currently set today, they got the thing all the way up to like 45 degrees and a little bit more. And all of a sudden the ropes had heated up so much that they started to slacken, and they thought they were going to lose it. And the story goes that there was like a sailor out in the crowd watching, because this had like people had come all over to watch them do this. And the sailor yelled out, he's like, "You need water for the ropes." Because once you put water back on them, they get taut and everything. So they're like, "Oh yeah." And so they go dump a bunch of water on the ropes, and the thing tightened up, and they were able to get it into position.
What a story.
What? It had to move somehow. So obviously.
Yeah, there's no, I can't come up with a better way to move it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just trying to figure out how many nails it would take to pound into that frame to keep everything together, because if that shifts a little bit, it's just going to pull all that wood apart.
You're holding 750 tons.
Yeah, there's just no way. So yeah, it's, oh shit, where were we?
We got onto the basilica, and then we
Oh, we were talking about the square.
Yes.
And the obelisk and everything. Okay. Well, finished in 1626. In 1870, the Pope would get very familiar with this area because the Kingdom of Italy had gone ahead and gotten their shit together and started taking over Italy. And once they're taking over Italy, they see this big, giant, beautiful capital of Rome right in the middle, the Roman Empire capital, the original place. Like, yeah, we should probably go ahead and take that and make that our capital. We got a lot of the Christian church hanging out in there. And once this new Kingdom of Rome or Kingdom of Italy comes forward, like, get behind the walls. Everybody, let's go into the Vatican. Let's lock up these walls. These guys are here, and these guys mean business. We don't have enough guys to take care of them. We have an unusually large army for a church.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and get behind the walls. And from 1870 to 1929, they basically hid in the Vatican City while the Kingdom of Italy went ahead and snatched up a couple of these papal states, because who's running the papal states? The guy that's hanging out behind the walls.
You don't have to beat them. And at the same time, you don't really, it's basically just keeping them on lockdown, because you're not going to go in there knowing how big Christianity is at this point, because it's not like once the Kingdom of Italy ends up unifying the entire country, they're just like, okay, we're switching back to paganism.
Mm-hmm.
They can't go in and destroy essentially the focal point for Christianity for all of these people, because that's instantly going to turn everybody against them. Yeah. All they have to simply do is say, okay, you guys go ahead and stay in your clubhouse, and we're just going to run around out here. Kind of the same thing that Hannibal did.
A little bit.
Kind of like that. And so as they're sitting inside this place, like Adam said, they're just like, fine, we'll just go snatch up the rest of these, papal states, and you guys won't have any place but this little clubhouse to hang out in. There was a time, was it during that entire time frame, that no pope had actually come out of the Vatican?
Nobody had left the Vatican walls. I think there were 5 popes that had gone through that entire time.
Which is crazy. You're just there, and the guy dies, and it's like, you're only able to select the Pope from who you have in there.
Yeah, technically they did sign something called the Law of Guarantees, and this guaranteed them like the ability to send and receive ambassadors.
Okay.
So there was still movement going in and out. Never the Pope. Pope definitely stayed inside that place and was going to make sure that he wasn't going to be taken hostage, but he wanted sovereignty. And they're like, "No, man, you're going to be a part of us whether you
You're
like it or
in
not."
Rome.
Yeah, you're behind the wall. We're not attacking you. We're not taking you over, but you don't get full sovereignty. And immediately the Pope was like, "Oh, well, then I'm a prisoner. You're holding me in this castle and you're not letting me go. You're not giving me sovereignty, so I'm a prisoner now." Like, well, you put yourself in there.
Yeah.
They don't want to kill you. They just want to take you over.
We literally just want to be a unified Italy at this point, and we can't be a unified Italy if you're going to have Rome or even a section of Rome or any of these other states. They end up going to war over this. The Papal States are able to field an army of about 15,000, whereas the Kingdom of Italy and all of those, the collective of all those like little independent areas that have all come together.
Genoa, Venice.
Yep, 35,000. So numbers. I mean, the Kingdom of Italy ends up winning out in this situation, and it's not like they're telling the church that they got to kick rocks or anything like that. It's just like, hey, like at this point, this is now Italy. You're in Italy. You can keep doing your thing, but there's also not going to be this, you run your territories, we run ours type thing.
Consequences.
Yep.
And this becomes something called the Roman question, because what do you do about the Vatican City? You have to, or the Vatican at this point in time. How do you...
From what I know about the teachings of, Peter and Jesus, the guy that you're really into, guy wasn't really into a lot of material things.
No.
So being a representative of his beliefs and his faith and everything, you guys don't even need these papal states, right? Like, you guys are fine with whatever you have.
They scored, though. This was one of the greatest land deals I think that had ever happened, because we run all the way up until 1929 when the first pope sees the light outside of the walls of the Vatican. They end up signing something called the 1929 Lateran Treaties. These were signed February 11th, 1929 between the Holy See. We'll explain the Holy See here in a little bit. Basically, it's just the head of the church.
Think of Holy Seat. It's the seat of holiness.
Whoever sits in the Holy Seat is the one that runs the Holy See.
There you go. SEE.
And the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Italy, somebody who everybody might know as Benito Mussolini.
So when you break it down, just so everyone's aware, Vatican City exists currently because of Benito Mussolini.
Yeah,
you don't hear that a lot.
No.
And I'm sure maybe at one point, I was going to ask you this before, but I wanted to get your reaction. Do you think at any point, because he was the one that signed the treaty, giving them full sovereignty and everything, do you believe at any point they had a plaque somehow thanking, or just something of saying like Benito Mussolini at any place in the Vatican? I imagine he had to be, because he technically didn't give them everything they wanted, but he gave them the main thing they wanted with the sovereignty, that at some point, it's of course been removed since, but there had to have been like a little placard or something. Like how at a stadium, if you donate a little bit, you get the little brick on the outside.
Are there pictures of Mussolini and the Pope shaking hands after they signed the treaty?
In the archive there is 100%.
Yeah, it's not something that I ever would have put together. Benito Mussolini and the Vatican don't really cross paths in my mind until this episode, just to see how interesting that is, that the fascist dictator of the Kingdom of Italy that does go on to fight communism in his own special way, along with his other fascist buddy, Hitler. There was a little bit more, they're strange bedfellows, but at the same time, when you look at what their motivations might have been going forward, maybe they were more aligned.
And at the same time, if you're really thinking about it, what did they really have? I mean, they had been in there since 1870, hadn't really done anything, and someone comes along and kind of throws them a bone, which it may not have all the trappings that you want, but it has, the big ones. It has the sovereignty, and it's got the full political influence for the Pope, and that's all that really matters.
I think the next biggest thing, though, and debatably an even bigger thing, is they received $92 million in 1929 as compensation for the taking of the Papal States.
They get a total of $92 million and 109 acres of land. So the footprint of Vatican City is less than 3/4 of a mile, square mile.
Yeah, it's actually, surprisingly enough, didn't even know this was coming. It is the most pope-dense state in the entire
5
country,
popes per square
or
mile.
in the world, yeah.
Yeah.
5 popes per square mile inside of Vatican City.
It's got the highest crime rate of any country because of all the pickpockets and everything that happened in St. Peter's Square. It's the highest wine consumption of any country. Probably don't have to explain that. But yeah, it's recognized as the smallest country in the world, and population around 760. I think full citizens of the Vatican City are, I think they said around 400. So you have to get citizenship. You can't be born into it or anything like that with Vatican City. You have to be provided citizenship by them. You can have dual citizenship.
How do you get the citizenship?
Did you look into how to get citizenship?
You have to work for the church.
Okay, yes, you have to work for the church. If you somehow only have Vatican citizenship, if you lose that, because that can be taken away. If you stop working for the church, they take your citizenship. You automatically become a citizen of Italy.
That's a nice little fallback plan, at least.
Yeah.
0.17 square miles, 0.44 square kilometers is all they have to work with. And I believe they said almost half of it is taken up by the Vatican Gardens. So
Did I say 3/4 of a square mile? Yeah, it's not that. Sorry. Yeah, it's like you said, it's
0.17 square
There you
miles. Just an insanely small chunk of land that this is on.
a third of it is the gardens too.
Yep. I think it was either a third or half or something like that. Just a crazy amount of gardens. As Chris was talking about with citizenship, it's granted for those who work for the Holy See. It's only temporary. It can be taken away at any time. It can be given with any kind of job. Most of the people that work inside of Vatican City aren't citizens. Most of them don't live inside there.
Yeah.
They just show up to do their work and their business. Some of the more notable things we've talked about a little bit, the Vatican obelisk is the only ancient obelisk in Rome that hasn't fallen, which is interesting because you were just talking about how they moved it and the fact that it didn't fall at any point in time.
It tipped over in a controlled manner, but it never
Never crashed
fell
to the ground. As we talked about too, the Swiss Guard is designed to protect the Pope. Did you talk about how their outfits, who designed them?
No, who ended up designing
I
them?
think it was Michelangelo.
Michelangelo,
excuse me.
Michelangelo's a Ninja Turtle. Michelangelo's the Renaissance artist. So at this point now, you effectively have a absolute monarchy. It's an elective absolute monarchy because the Pope has to be selected by the College of Cardinals, known as the King of Vatican City and the Holy See. So again, all the trappings of a sovereign nation this place has.
It just,
except space.
it blows me away to think that you choose the king of a country by choosing the next pope of a religion. Like, you get both of those things. You become the king of Vatican City and the Holy See at the exact same time. And I mean, you have to be given citizenship to become pope if you're not.
So here's the ironic thing that we were also discussing is that St. Peter's Basilica, despite all of the focus on it, is not considered the mother church in Rome. It's not considered the focal point. The Pope is not the Pope or the bishop of, because essentially you have the Pope who is like the king bishop. You have bishops that are essentially in charge of the diocese. And so the Pope just happens to be the Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome, the church that he's tied to, is the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, and it's located in another area in Rome.
I wonder if that was by the Lateran Palace that they originally stayed in.
It would make sense.
Probably.
So yeah, so that's essentially where he does his poping. He just happens to live in Vatican City, but he has to then commute to work.
Yeah, just a wild setup that they got going on there. Before we dive into the Sistine Chapel, do we want to take a bathroom break?
Yep, let's do it.
Cool.
Well, hey there, all you sexy historians. How you guys doing?
It is time for
Socials.
Where can they find us on Instagram?
If they want to follow us, they can find us at Historically High Pod on Instagram.
That goes the same for Threads as well. You can also find us on Twitter.
Tell them about Twitter.
Historically High. That's historically HI on Twitter.
And if you want to email any of your comments or suggestions, where can they find us at, Adam?
At historically high podcast at gmail.com.
Gmail. All right, and back to the show. You know, I just realized.
Huh.
I think the Pope is a lot like Walt Disney, or Walt Disney is a lot like the Pope.
He hid out in an apartment in his own little fun house.
Yeah, so like you have Disneyland, you have
Yeah.
Vatican City, you have the castle, the basilica,
Mm-hmm.
you have the little apartment on Main Street that he stayed in. He has his apartment. But when Walt has to go to work, he doesn't go to the castle to go to work. He has to go over to the Imagineering and everything, the building that's across the way, and go to work there. So basically, Walt Disney is just the Pope of Disneyland.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got to head over to the Sistine Chapel to do his work. Sistine Chapel was built from 1473 to 1481, and it has the famous frescoes from Botticelli and Michelangelo that adorn this place. It's, I mean, not having any religious feelings towards this place at all. It's by far and away one of the most beautiful places. Just looking at the pictures, the frescoes are incredible.
So everything is based, I think he did like all the like creation myth stuff. That's why you have like God with the finger outstretched to like Adam and everything. And also when Michelangelo first did it, so the way that it was set up to do it, it's way, way off the fucking ground. So you're not going to build scaffolding that goes up. Also, when they called him in to do this, was he 72 years old?
He's an old man. I think he was 72 when he was working on
The Basilica.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's right. They brought him back in because of what he did at the Sistine Chapel. So
Is that right?
I think you're right.
Sistine
yes, because this was
Chapel-
built before the Sistine Chapel.
I know, but if he was still around 1500, yeah, that wouldn't have worked. That math doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. So he builds the Sistine Chapel. It finishes in 1481. They pull him in to start on St. Peter's Basilica because it started in 1506. He was old at that point. That's why he's considered. That's why he's considered essentially one of the principal designers of it. And then he had his successor, which I think was Sangello. He's the other guy that kind of were the principal guys that they said were responsible because he kind of designed it and everything, and then the other guys had to run with it.
That's right, and he would have drawn everything or refrescoed everything inside of.
Well, I remember what ended up happening. So he drew inspiration for the dome portion. He's like, well, the ancient Romans did it with the Pantheon, and they were able to design that to support itself. I want to do something similar. So he designed it in a way that it was going to be similar, just larger. When the other guy came in, and there were a couple different guys because it took a long time, and of course the dome is going to be one of the last things built. The technology had advanced a little bit more. He kind of found some ways structurally to change a little bit to add ribs for support. He also put iron bands kind of around it at certain points to also provide it structural support. But yeah, so going back to the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's brought in to paint the ceiling of it and paint other stuff. But the way that so the first guy suggests, he's like, hey, if you're going to paint the ceiling, we'll install these hooks and then we can hang essentially the stand that you're going to be on from the hooks. And he's like, no, fuck that. He's like, you ain't putting holes in this masterpiece that I'm going to be making. I'll figure out another way. So they basically designed this scaffolding that spans the entire section. It doesn't go the entire section front to back, but side to side. And it rests on essentially these wooden pegs that stick out from the wall. It would be to where he wouldn't be laying down on it. It had enough space to where he could essentially be walking around, and then he would just have to look up and kind of raise his hand. So he's basically just having to crane his neck up the entire time that he's painting this thing.
And it's like he's got an easel just right above him.
And not only that, but how do you get any depth of field, like dimension? Like how many times like do you see a painter have to step back to, and he's painting something so massive, like to get the scale. They said he would paint the pictures on like a canvas, and then he would take the canvas up with him and basically be looking at the canvas and be just like making it bigger
Just
and enlarging
scaling
it
it
when he
up.
was in scaling it up. So he gets this entire thing painted, the creation myth, Adam, touching the finger of God, all of that beautiful shit, regardless if you believe in religion or not. It would be like nowadays if you walked into some place and someone had done an entire like Marvel or Lord of the Rings or Star Wars mural, just something about like the mythology and things like that. And then in the 90s, or I think 80s and 90s, when they went back in to do all the restoration, they made it look fantastic. But unfortunately, they covered up all the wieners and butts that Michelangelo had felt necessary to get his point across in painting those beautiful things in there. And they had to go and ruin it.
God's creation,
Yeah.
man and woman in their truest
Butts
form.
and nuts.
It puts asses in seats to look at asses on the ceiling. Along with that, the Sistine Chapel is also home to where they do I believe it's the Cardinal Conclaves.
College of Cardinals, I believe. Oh, I'm going to look it up. It's the thing that they meet for is the conclave, and I believe the group of them is the College of Cardinals.
And this is used to pick a new pope, to pick a new king of the Vatican City. I think everybody's kind of familiar with this. If they decide one day, or if one day ends, they decide that they don't have a pope yet, they send up black smoke, which I heard was like a mixture of hay and papers that they had written on their ballots, something along those lines.
Yeah, so what they do, and you're right, it's called the Papal Conclave. So what they do is everyone writes down who they want.
Yeah.
They then call it out, and regardless, I think if it's they don't decide or they do decide, they'll put them all in the little burner that connects to the smokestack, and then they'll throw something in with it. One thing creates the black smoke, and then whatever they put in with it on a positive vote or whatever is going to be what creates the white smoke.
If they end up getting the Pope, then they put up white smoke. I want to say it was the last time, or maybe two popes ago, that they had a little mix up and it was like gray smoke one day, and people were debating, is that black? Is that white? What's going
Half
on?
the crowd's going like, yay! No, the half are going, oh.
Not again, not another
It's
day.
just
of
that
this.
weird thing in the crowd. It's like, hey, yeah. Oh.
But either way, it's kind of the most important building because it's where they choose the next ruler. So not only is it beautiful and it has all this history, it still has a function that decides what or who 1.2 billion people across the world call the Pope.
Are going to have a picture of in their house.
Just so crazy.
That's so crazy too. I text you that. Just thinking about that, people have pictures of Jesus in their houses. Okay. But then at the same time, to have a picture of the Pope, the leader of something, the only other times I really think in my head that people have been required or felt necessary to have pictures of people in their houses, Kim Jong comes to mind. I think Stalin comes to mind. I'm not making I'm just saying the pictures in the house thing. It brings to mind certain people requiring people to have pictures of them in their house.
Yeah, we didn't have a picture of Hinckley in our house. Gordon B., not the assassin, John Hinckley. But we didn't have one in our house, but I'll be damned if the other Mormon families didn't have one in their house.
I want a fun Pope picture. I want like a candid, funny,
sticking
like
his
Pope
tongue
picture.
out. Yeah,
Or like wearing like paint me wearing a funny hat.
He does wear a funny hat, but
Or can you imagine if they did the thing that they superimpose the people on fucking animals, like riding the shark and everything, like holding the spear? Just that's your Pope image. Just a jacked fucking Pope riding a fucking bear.
like they put a filter over him, like a Snapchat filter. Like he's got the Post Malone with all the tattoos on his
Pope's
face.
Malone.
Post Malone.
Yeah, with
perfect.
Pope's Malone. Somebody, if you guys listen to this and someone can do Photoshop really well, please design and send us a photo or an image of Pope's Malone.
Riding on a camel.
Riding on a badass Pope mobile.
Yeah.
Design it with like Pope mobile sports car.
Mercedes Pope Mobile.
A G-Wagon.
G-Wagon, even better. Moving along, the Vatican Library is kind of I mean, I don't really know how to phrase how big this is. It's one of the oldest libraries in the world. It contains documents up to 2,000 years old. The total length of shelving inside of this place is 26 miles, 42 kilometers long. 26 miles of shelving. It was formally established in 1475, so that's when the collection just started to grow. 75,000 codices. There's 1.1 million books from throughout history in this library. That's so long. It's so big. And
I know one book that isn't in there. We'll get to it later.
okay.
A pamphlet of sorts.
And within this is also everything that they have after they move to and from France. So much of that shit that was shipped to France where this new papacy was going to be was lost in the move, because you always lose stuff in the move. And when you have that many documents and you're taking it from one country to another, eventually some stuff's going to get lost. And then when you move it back to the original country, there's going to be some stuff that gets lost. And even though that happens, the library that's, I believe, a public display now, because we're going to get some stuff that's a little less public, 1.1 million books. That's a lot of collecting. And I'm sure a lot of stuff that they probably took without asking.
It's got to be like Library of Congress type stuff.
Probably.
Just a copy of literally anything and everything. They've got to have one copy of anything that they deem appropriate.
I would also like to think that there's some books in there that have like some doodles from some board bishops or board cardinals or board popes.
You got to imagine someone didn't agree with something and just made a correction in the margins, or saw a spelling error and then just did the little
gotta be something next to there. Yeah.
Now, 26 miles, and I'm not going to get ahead of ourselves, but I do just want to make the comparison. Those are the books that they'll like formally admit, like, this is in our library, this is what we have.
But 26 miles, isn't a marathon like 26.2 miles?
I think so.
So literally a marathon's worth of shelving.
Well, you could also get to more than 2 marathons worth in the other area that they keep stuff.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay.
Next, the Papal Palace is the residence of the Pope that connects to both the Sistine Chapel and the Basilica, so you can get to either one. I believe they're underground passageways.
There's so many passageways there. So if you're like geographically, most of the stuff that like are the buildings and everything are kind of all in the same area. So if you're standing in the middle of St. Peter's Square, you got your back against the obelisk. If you're looking straight at St. Peter's Basilica, if you were to look at maybe like your 2 or 3 o'clock up, that's going to be like the Papal Palace. It kind of overlooks St. Peter's Square. I don't believe you can see it from St. Peter's Square, but nestled in between those, right next to the Basilica, kind of running the same direction as it is, that's where the Sistine Chapel is. And the Sistine Chapel, I used to think, how many people grew up thinking it was called the 16th Chapel?
Not me.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't make that connection.
Oh, I thought they had like 15 other chapels, and this was just
the 16th Chapel.
Yes.
Why is it called the Sistine Chapel?
It's called the Sistine Chapel because the guy that actually
he had a lisp and he was trying to say 16.
Huh?
He had a lisp and he was trying to say 16.
No, that wasn't it. It was actually designed by a guy that his last name was. Oh shit! I'm trying to look it up right now. Keep going. I'll find it.
Inside this papal palace, you would assume the Pope's going to live there. He's probably going to have some fun stuff to look at. He has artwork inside the Papal Palace from Picasso, Van Gogh, Rodin, and Chagall. So heavy hitters in the world of art are just hung inside the Papal Palace.
So it actually takes its name from Pope Sixtus the Fourth, is the one that had it built. So he wasn't the one that built it; he was the one that had it built.
So the 64th Pope, Sixtus the Fourth.
Yeah, not the. I see what you did there, but no. Ha 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 ha.
But the Papal Palace it's huge because they had this Lateran Palace that they had lived in afterwards. And then once they updated it, once they became a sovereign nation, there's just all these remodels and renovations that go on to change this residence into what they want it to be now. And there's also like There's a Pope's summer house that's out a ways that actually used to be where I believe it's like the Catholic Church had a like a big telescope. They did astronomy out there and like stargazing and all that kind of stuff.
They do have one in Vatican City. They have so
they had it, but I thought they said the light pollution from Rome ruined it. So then they moved it out to the Pope's summer house, and then the light pollution from Rome getting even bigger ruined that. So then they moved it to Tucson, Arizona.
yes. So the entire kind of story behind this, you would wonder, why would a church, and churches and science they're still not, I mean, there's a little bit more acceptance of it, but they were not good bedfellows. So you'd be wondering why, especially kind of back during this time, a church would be kind of dabbling in the sciences, and it was for self-serving reasons. What they determined was they needed to nail down their own consistent calendar. And this is where we get the origination of the calendar that we all use today. So,
which is
the Gregorian calendar.
Yes.
So before that, it was the Julian calendar.
For Julius?
Huh?
Caesar?
Yep. So it was developed under the patronage, I'm guessing, of Caesar,
do it.
not by fucking Caesar himself. But you get this Pope, I think it was Pope Gregory, which is why we know it as the Gregorian calendar, basically commissions this investigation into designing a calendar that will remain consistent. This is where we get the calculation of everything about the rotation of the Earth, coming out to where we need a leap year every 4 years. The Julian calendar, it wasn't that far off, but the Julian year was 11 minutes longer than what's going to be the Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar essentially was like, well, over the course of 125 years, we're going to be adding a new day. We're going to, have an extra day. So they designed it essentially. They took some days off of October. October used to have like a little bit of extra time. They kind of spread it around.
Doesn't it already have 31 days? Yeah.
It had an extra, I think.
Oh.
And I think it was a little bit longer because isn't that supposed to be like a solstice or some type of like something in October? I'm not sure. I just know they said October had an extra day. So they ended up developing this, and it takes years and years and years of study. And they're using this astronomy tower and telescope and everything that they have in Vatican City to do so. Well, over the years, as the city of Rome grows, technology introduces light bulbs and all that kind of shit. Light pollution ends up kicking in, and they're not able to see shit. So they end up developing and putting in like a state-of-the-art telescope that they currently own right now. That's in Arizona, up on the top of some mountain.
Tucson.
Yeah, in Tucson.
Weird.
To be working for the Vatican, living in Tucson.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the assignment you want to draw, but you do get to stare into a telescope all day, which is pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm. Just don't ever suggest that there's other planets with life on them. Don't get any fucking ideas while you're there.
Well, I think the Catholic Church has kind of nipped this one in the bud, because one of the interviews that I listened to, the astronomer that they were talking about said that there's just no way that with all of these other planets that have livable conditions that God wouldn't have placed another group of people.
God damn it. You had me with the comment. I was about to be like, oh, finally common sense. And then you said the last thing is the explanation for
God created the universe. He created everything. So, of course, he could create another planet like us that he is also the main deity of.
Please stop.
But that's their solution to this kind of stuff. The Vatican museums I found fascinating as well. They display works collected by the Catholic Church. They contain more than 70,000 works of art. They employ more than 600 people, so they almost employed the entire amount of citizens.
Or people, the population.
The population of Vatican City.
That's got to be a lot of people coming in from off-site running the gift shop.
Rome for sure. Absolutely. But to think of them collecting more than 70,000 works of art over the history of the world, I mean, it's not a huge number when you think about what they did, but that's a lot.
So not only and this is a little bit off topic. So the way that this place makes money, of course, is by donations to the Catholic Church all over the world. So they're raking in money there.
You don't pay taxes.
Don't pay taxes. And at the same time, you're also selling stuff at Vatican City, things like stamps. You're also charging admission to places like, the St. Peter's Basilica and the museum and everything. So they're also making a ton of money from basically a gift shop as well.
Oh, yeah. Everybody needs their Pope on a rope when they go to the
Everybody
Vatican
needs their
City.
Mickey ears. Do you think they sell Pope hats? Like little mini Pope hats?
Ah, that might
You're
be
missing an opportunity,
yeah,
Vatican
like
City, if you are
cheeseheads
not
in
selling Pope
Wisconsin.
hats. Make them different colors, like how they do with the Mickey ears. Like make a Star Wars themed Pope hat, and make a Halloween Nightmare Before Christmas Pope hat. Those things would sell.
Give me a tie-dye Pope hat.
Lion King Pope hat.
Yeah. Lion King Pope hat feels like it's fitting. Um, but yeah, it's these collections, or this collection was the Catholic Church's collection. So this wasn't like a dominating force that was going down and taking these things from other places.
So this isn't the British Museum.
No, there is something that is in the British Museum that we will talk about. But just this whole entire place is just kind of a display of, hey, we did some of this artwork and some of this stuff that you guys are watching, but also we took a lot of that stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
But it was in the name of God, so it's okay.
Oh yeah, it's fine.
We're going to move into something that kind of shook me because I didn't realize that this existed. It's called the Institute for Works of Religion, or the IOR, or the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank...
You're bringing all that money, buddy. You need someplace to put it.
Well, when you start founding a bank, this bank was founded in 1942 by Pope Pius XII. Now, 1942 is an interesting time in the world.
Pope Pius XII is an interesting guy.
He is a very, very interesting man. But, would there be maybe a certain influx of gold, cash, valuables coming from anywhere that would need to end up creating a bank to house it all?
Maybe.
There's a chance, right? And when I read you the mission statement of what the IOR actually does, I'm sure it's going to be crystal clear when I say this. The purpose of the IOR is to provide for the safekeeping and administration of movable and immovable property transferred or entrusted to by its physical or judicial persons and intended for the works of religion and charity. Do you understand anything that said at all?
If you use enough words, stuff will get lost.
When I was writing that down, it took me 10 minutes to write that sentence down just because there were so many little extra words that were thrown in. But it does end up with intended for works of religion and charity.
If you think that's mouthy, look up the full name of that Archbasilica of St. John Lateran. It is insane. That is literally the first line of it, and I think there's about 6 lines.
Wow. Well, it was probably dedicated to so many different people and so many different saints and priests and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the Vatican City, it has its own bank. It has its own banking system. It's very big business that goes on there. And we also don't know how much money is in the Vatican Bank and how much money the Catholic Church has, because since it's private and since they're sovereign, they don't have to report any of that.
Yeah, you don't need to take money to the Swiss bank. You got your own that can't be looked into.
Exactly.
Not to go back too far, but going back to the Pius beforehand, which was Pope Pius XI. Now, as we're, kind of in the time frame of the rise of Nazi Germany and Italy, essentially kind of being involved in that whole thing with, Mussolini and all, Pope Pius XI was, I'm not sure if he was right before. He had to have been actually probably right before Pope Pius XII because of the time frame.
I want to say there might have been somebody in between, but maybe not.
Okay. So weirdly enough, Pope Pius XI actually died the day before he was ready to give a speech that was going to denounce the Nazi regime. Now, coincidentally, and when I say that, I mean not coincidentally, he got an injection the day before he died. It might have been the day of, from his, the Vatican physician. I don't know if it was just vitamins or he was battling illness or something like that.
Did they know about that back then? Did they know about injecting vitamins back then?
Yeah, I assume Hitler was getting injected with shit all the fucking time.
Okay, yeah, I guess we're talking about the 40s.
I'm not saying this stuff was healthy that he was getting injected with, but it wasn't intended to kill him.
Like
or
mercury?
Was it? Because the Vatican physician, his daughter, just happened to be one of Mussolini's mistresses.
Huh.
And so I'm not trying to put on the tinfoil hat, but if you draw very clear lines, you have a pope who essentially whose power base is located in one of the Axis powers.
Yeah.
who's with Nazi Germany, who's about ready to denounce the Nazis to their 1 billion, 2 billion strong fan base, basically. And then the day before he's going to do that, he ends up being killed, injected by the father of Benito Mussolini's mistress. There just is, it's a weird connection, and maybe it is coincidence, and that's why it just falls into place like that. But I think there's something more to it.
There's a lot of coincidences with the Catholic Church.
Also, the speech that he had wrote was never found. And they go through all of their shit after they die.
They go through all their shit, and then we got to wait a real long time after that.
Correct, but what I'm saying is that you would think that at some point in his art, because they release, isn't there a certain time frame after a pope dies?
70 years.
70 years after all their memoirs and all of their private information then gets released. Enough time for most people to die.
Yeah, I mean, also, if you're waiting 70 years to release things, why not just burn anything that you don't want to be released? I mean, not everything can make it into the archive.
Correct, but he's not in a position where he's going to be burning something he's going to give a speech on like that day or the next day.
This was post-mortem. Somebody had burned whatever it was that he had written this speech.
Or just taking it out of his room after they injected him.
Because didn't they have knowledge of this because somebody had listened to him give the speech prior
he had
to?
been like bouncing it off of like I don't know what you call them, like a page or something like that.
And he had written it down. I'm
not trying to date myself, but a page is like an assistant. He probably had some type of somebody who was like, I would assume probably you would have someone that would like, you would dictate to.
Yeah.
And they would write down shit.
Yeah, not just a woman name page. There might have been male pages too. I'm sure they were probably all male pages, actually.
I think they were probably all male pages.
Yeah, it's just very interesting. And if you aren't going to put on your tinfoil hat, I hope that everybody that's listened to the first hour and change of this is like, oh, wow, this is just going to be a Vatican City episode. We're not getting into conspiracy.
This all takes place in Vatican City.
Yeah, and now they're thinking, oh, shit, they're going into conspiracy mode on this one. We are. And it's because this stuff is very, very interesting in reference to the bank.
Yes, but you can't. Here's the whole point. You cannot be this big for this long and be clean. It's not possible, especially when you are an institution that has this much power. There is no way that you just have that power and maintain that power by not doing some secretive or shady shit. There's just not a possible way for that to happen.
Oh, and maybe
it's people. You don't have something that's larger than people that are in control here. You have a figurehead that some people believe is more than a person, that has a direct connection or some type of higher connection to fucking God or whatever. But when it comes down to it, this is an institution being run by people.
It's pretty good cover, though.
Yeah.
To be that close to God that maybe you wouldn't do something nefarious.
That you're above reproach.
Yeah. Nefarious fellow named Roberto Calvi was also known as God's banker. He was an Italian banker who worked closely with the Holy See. He was the chairman of a bank named the Banco Ambrosiano.
Great name for a bank.
Pretty cool.
Ambrosia, like the nectar of the gods, all that kind of stuff.
I just even like the way the Banco sounds.
Yeah.
Banco Ambrosiano has a very rough ending because when it collapsed because there were several $1 billion of, I think it's called lira, whatever their money was back then, had been exported illegally. So couple $1 billion has been pumped out of the bank. 1974, another interesting story that goes along with this.
Buddy, it was like several billion lira that had been exported illegally.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy, here's the thing. There's also ties in this Banco Ambrosia thing. If you're also in Italy, you're a huge banker, who are you going to maybe have a couple run-ins with, whether you work with them or not. There's going to be situations in which you're going to be involved one way or another with probably the mafia.
Well, the mafia and Banco Ambrosiano was the majority of ownership in the bank was the Holy See.
I love how you say the bank.
The bank. Another episode that seems familiar to what the story is that we're about to tell you. 1974, the Holy See lost $30 million in the collapse of something called the Franklin National Bank that was owned by a woman named Michelle Sindona. Sindona would go on to prison for obviously running this bank that collapsed because they had lent out a bunch of money and had faked some documents. She died in prison, though. She died in prison drinking coffee. Later on, an autopsy would find that there was cyanide laced inside of her coffee.
I mean, it's a bitter drink. You wouldn't notice.
I'm sure a lot of people lost a lot of money during this Franklin National Bank that ended up collapsing. $30 million, probably a drop in the bucket for the Holy See. But it's interesting that she ends up dying because Calvi ends up running into the same fate. The Holy See,
a little bit more theatrical here.
Yeah,
he'd actually, when they were being investigated, and it wasn't just money being transported out, lira being transported out or anything like that. He was also fined like almost $20 million for transferring like 27 million US dollars out of the country for violation of Italian currency laws. So he's moving money all over the world. Again, a huge shareholder in this Banco Ambrosia is the Holy See. So 2 weeks before the complete collapse of the bank, he writes a letter warning Pope John Paul, basically stating like, hey, if this ends up going down, this bank collapses, it's going to be a huge catastrophe. It's going to be a disaster for the church. Now, whether he meant this as a threat saying like, hey, you better not let this thing fail and bail me out because I know you have a shit ton of money because I handle a lot of your money, or if he was using it as a threat, he may have been threatening, saying that you need to use this to bail me out, or he was just simply saying like, hey, you guys might need to step in on this.
I don't think he wrote any of the other backers a letter like that.
No, I don't think he did, but he's basically making what is probably interpreted as some type of like veiled threat about what's going to come out if this thing collapses, and then they're able to just go full investigation mode into the dealings of this bank. Well, the Vatican Bank in 1984 ends up agreeing to pay $224 million to 120 of the bank's creditors, basically as a recognition of moral involvement in the bank's collapse. So it's like one of those things. It's like, listen, we didn't really do anything wrong, but because we feel bad about this situation, we'll go ahead and shell out, $250 million for this thing.
Well, and I want to say, too, that $224 million was a drop in the bucket, too, because I think their outstanding debts were between like $700 million and like $1 billion plus.
Yeah.
So this wasn't paying off the entirety of the Ambrosiano's debts. They'll let that fall to some of the creditors, but just to say, hey, we feel that there's a little moral involvement because we actually were a part of this bank that collapsed, so we're going to pay a little, but we're trying
to look like the good guys. We don't have to pay anything technically because it wasn't our fault that this collapsed. We're as shocked as anybody else. We're victims here as well, but we're also going to help out the other victims.
But we're sure as shit not going to make you whole.
Yeah.
We'll pay you a little bit, but we're not going to pay the entire thing.
We're not that moral about this entire thing.
No. Flashback to June 18th, 1982. Calvi's body was discovered hanging from scaffolding beneath London's Blackfriar Bridge. So Calvi had escaped from Italy. I forgot his exact route that he took, but he ended up in London. And
did he take one of the rat lines? We didn't even touch on that during World War II.
We'll get to it.
Okay.
But they ruled this a suicide because he was hanging beneath the scaffolding with bricks in his pockets, which I don't know if they thought that this banker was an idiot, but you don't need bricks in your pockets to successfully hang yourself. Just seems odd that would be the way that it was, but it was ruled a suicide. People that didn't believe this theory had 2 separate inquests that were done by a medical examiner. And
his family prompted it, right? Like his mother or something like that?
I think it might have been, yeah.
His suicide note had been written differently than he had normally written her letters. He called her a different name. Mm-hmm. He called his sister by a different name instead of her nickname, and the way that he dated the letter was inconsistent with how he had dated letters before.
So there's some weird shit there. They were kind of trying to figure out how this could have happened. There were talks that they went back and looked at tide maps, and a boat could have pulled up underneath this scaffolding and just hung him from there. They said that the other kind of inconsistencies were he would have had to shimmy down a few of the pipes to get to where he had hung himself. And he was a pretty portly man, I guess.
He was old. He was overweight. And they even tested the shoes that he was wearing. They reconstructed what happened. It wasn't at the time they did the investigation. They had to go back and do the investigation when it was hired, like by his family privately. And they determined that, first of all, climbing down in his condition, he also suffered from vertigo, which probably would have been a big kicker in this situation.
Tough to climb with vertigo,
Tough to climb.
Sure.
His shoes had no residue from the pipes or
From the
anything
paint
like that.
on the pipes.
And in every single one of the, I guess, reenactments, what you would call it during the investigation, every single time they climbed down in any way down to this location, even climbing up from what would have been a boat, you would have still had to put your feet on it. His feet actually showed no residue from the pipes, which means that that would lead to believing that he never even climbed up there. And like Adam said, at that certain point during the tide, someone could have pulled up in a boat. The other thing that looked really suspicious is where they actually found him. So they find him in London under this thing called Blackfriars Bridge. Now, the Blackfriars, apparently, this was also a name for the Freemasons. I know this is going to sound nutty anytime you say Freemasons, but apparently the Freemasons, because they had some type of opposition to the Catholic Church and everything, because the Freemasons' belief was based out of like the Freemasons that actually built like Temple of Solomon, all that kind of shit. So they were also like a religious entity to some degree. It kind of seems weird that they tried to make it sound like, because I think we're both in agreement that just based on the investigation and his condition at the time, getting into that position, there were much easier ways and much more direct ways that he could have hung himself in any other position. Plus, how is this motherfucker going to climb down there also with bricks in his pocket as well?
Well, and there's just a litany of faster, easier ways that he could have done it.
They also exhumed the body and were able to do an autopsy to a degree on it and determine that the wounds on the neck were inconsistent with what would have caused like the damage caused by a hanging for the cause of death.
So he couldn't even get that right.
So they couldn't even get that right. So a lot of stuff points to him essentially being killed beforehand and then staging it to look like a suicide by putting him under that position on Blackfriars Bridge. They were, I think, trying to essentially kind of point it to maybe being some type of like Freemason retaliation or something like that, because they knew he had all these connections to the Catholic Church or the Christian. Are we just going to do the Catholic Church at this point? Yeah. It starts out as Christianity, now it's the Catholic Church. But yeah, very, very, very suspect, especially for someone that just essentially had sent notification to the Catholic Church that something would go very bad for them if the bank collapsed, and maybe he had something to say.
But as you were alluding to earlier, not only did Calvi work with the Vatican Bank, he also worked with the Sicilian Mafia, another organization that has a shitload of dirty money that needs it to be cleaned. And seeing as the Vatican were major bankers with Ambrosiano, the Vatican Bank had knowingly or unknowingly been used to launder Sicilian Mafia money. And if the Mafia was also very angry at Calvi, possibility too. So it's not like we're just pointing the finger at the Catholic Church, because I'm sure the mob probably wasn't super pumped about losing their cash cow either.
I think the conspiracy on this, because there's so much evidence, isn't like, was it a suicide or was it actually like a staged suicide or a murder? It's who had the most incentive to do it.
Well, they even brought, I think it was 5 people that went up on trial in Rome in 2007 for this murder that happened all the way back in 1982. But they were all acquitted of the homicide.
Yeah.
So it just a very odd, interesting grouping of events that happened around a bank that can't be checked into because they are in their own sovereign nation. The Vatican Archives might be the most interesting thing in this entire episode. It is the central repository in the Vatican City for all of the acts of the Holy See. Everything inside the Vatican Archives, which used to be called, the Vatican Secret Archives, seems like putting secret on something like that. Putting secret on something like that is like the number one way to make people start to get suspicious.
Which is why you just call it the Vatican Archives now.
Yeah.
Because you want to make it seem like stuff is not secret.
I think it's like the Vatican Apostolic Archives or something like that now.
You got to rebrand it.
Yeah. But the Pope is actually, he owns everything inside the archives until his death or his resignation. Then the ownership is transferred to the next pope. So it's always under, everything in there is owned by him.
That kind of sounds, is that, I mean, they don't own it, but that kind of sounds like the same deal with like how we handle the president. You get access to like all of the, or most of the shit.
Yeah, but I think you can choose what happens to it. Whereas anything within like the National Library in the United States or the National Archives, you have to go through checks and balances to do anything with any of that
That's
stuff.
true.
Whereas the Pope can just be like, yep, take that out. Yep, make that public.
So whereas the library of the stuff that's accessible is 26 miles worth of shelves, the Vatican Secret Archives, 53 miles of shelving.
That's so much shelving.
53 miles of documents that are kept under lock and key by the Vatican. Now,
And that's just what they tell us. That's our best guess.
yeah, that's the best guess. So you change the name from the Secret Archives, but I can guarantee you all that shit is still secret. You have all of the information that is sent for private notes from the popes and everything that's kept secret until you said like the 70-year time frame where they can release just the like certain pope records and everything. But 53 miles, you've been collecting documentation from all over the world for how many years?
Centuries, yeah.
Centuries that you've been keeping this stuff up. You're keeping all of your financial records. Fine, keep that shit private. I don't really give a fuck in regards to that. But I know that you have some dirty shit somewhere within that 53-mile stretch of documents that you're hiding down there. And I mean, it's almost like, I feel like, okay, it's probably worse what they actually have down there than what I can actually imagine, but you feel like you can imagine some pretty crazy shit, and I even think the stuff down there that you would find would probably fucking curl your fucking hairs.
Well, what, Father Maxey, to get to the Holy Writ, had to jump across an alligator lake, the South Park episode? You remember that?
I don't remember that one.
Father Maxey has to go all the way to the Vatican to go change the Holy Writ of Vatican law, so they'll stop molesting kids.
No law will prevent that from happening. Yeah, can you imagine what do you think the section is? Because we're not just like, no, we're at a conspiracy mode on this. This is stuff that has actually happened, that's recognized, that's been...
We'll get back into it, but yeah.
But that's been acknowledged by the Vatican. Well, it's only acknowledged when stuff comes out enough to where they can just be like, it didn't happen, and then it comes out that it did happen. They're like, well, it was just that one guy that did it. And then it's like, well, now we have like 3,000 different, like, priests being accused of these things. And I'm not saying all 3,000 are guilty, because you're going to get shit that's made up. But even if we were to say, I don't know, like 500 of those accounts are correct, you still have 500 documented cases of fucking kids getting molested and assaulted and all that shit. And that stuff is all down there in the fucking archives.
I'm sure that the numbers are much higher to the accusations, but along with just all that, you have correspondence and account books to be able to see who these popes were talking to and what was going on. You have to assume that there's, in the archives, there has to be correspondence between Mussolini and the Pope and Pius down there that are talking to each other about the Lateran treaties. What do we get the whole outline? Was it a negotiation process? Did the Pope fire something off to Mussolini, and then Mussolini fired back his next offer, and then they gave like the last and best, and they just agreed on it from there? I'm sure that stuff is probably getting close to being released. Actually, it is technically released because, like we said, a pope's notes are typically unsealed about 70 years after the end of their pontificate, so the end of their reign or the end of their life.
Yeah, but who determines what gets released?
Well, and the other thing is you can only release what makes it into the archives. So just like we were talking about with the speech that was given by the 11th, if you don't want it, and you don't want anybody to ever have a chance of finding it, if you just don't ever put it in the archives, then nobody can find it, right?
That's the thing. So not only does it have to get through the fact of like, should this go in the archives? Should this ever be possible to be, to be released? Nah. But then you also have, if anything gets through that net, that should have got through that net, then you have the time when they're releasing it. And it's not like they just go get the boxes and there's a whole bunch of journalists and stuff. There's tables set up and they just set the boxes out. They're like, go nuts, guys. Tell us what you find. No, all of that stuff is meticulously reviewed, and then they're just like, you can have this. And this, wow, this Pope he was just not very active in, noting documents and really taking down any information. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you guys. It's literally just this one box.
Or the other direction, because as Chris is alluding to with the choices of what come out, Pope Pius XII, his notes from 1939 to 1958, which was the length of his term as Pope, were unsealed early to satisfy critics of his seeming indifference towards the Jewish atrocities that were committed by the Nazis. These were unsealed in 2020. I believe it was March 2020. There wasn't anything else that was going on in March 2020, was there?
There might have been a slight global pandemic.
A sickness that might have been starting. Interesting timing nonetheless. The archives included...
How early was it released? Just curious.
So if it was 2020 and he was 58...
It should have been 2028, right? No.
Yeah, because it would have been 2 more years, 42 years, 62 years.
It should have been in
2026?
Yeah, 2028. Yeah.
2028, okay.
So you end up releasing that.
I guess there was an easy way to do that math.
You release that while other shit is going on. I don't even hear... and I don't follow this stuff. I'm not just on fucking Pope watch where I'm just waiting for documents to be unsealed. But at the same time, if you have a lot of other shit going on, had you waited the 70 years, 2028 comes along, people don't have that kind of shit to pay attention to. Now focus can come back on this and really start to get into the nitty gritty. The whole thing with the kind of Pope Pius XII and the communications with the Nazis and everything is that he in some circumstances, he was vocal, but it wasn't very loud. And then some stuff has come out afterward about he did this. He rescued, a bunch of these Jewish people from Poland and got them out, and the church would shelter them in the, Catholic churches in those areas and everything like that. But then there wasn't really any outward condemnation about what was going on. And here's the thing too, is if you're rescuing these people, then something is going on with these people, and firsthand from accounts for people that are coming out what's my family was taken, or people that maybe escaped from a camp or early on, or the trains or something like that. You would know to a degree if you're sheltering these people what's happening. In fact, you might know faster than places like the Red Cross or the Allies even know.
Well, and along with these lifelines that are going to these Jewish people, we also have something that we did an entire episode on, the rat lines.
Yeah.
And they were looking for potential notes that were pertaining to contact with the Austrian bishop, Hudal. There was a Genoan archbishop named Giuseppe Siri. There was a Bosnian priest named Krunoslav Draganovic. And they led these Nazi rat lines after World War II. So these
Brad
were
Pitt from Inglourious Basterds. These Nazis.
Nazis, yeah. They were helping these high-level Nazis escape and get these not passports for the Red Cross.
No, yeah, you're correct.
Passports in the Red Cross.
So you had Bishop Hudal, was Austrian, was sympathetic to the Nazis. Obviously, there had to have been at least some type of whispers, because he's a fucking bishop.
Yeah.
There had to have been some type of knowledge of where kind of his sympathies were lying. So you would think that after World War II, you would be like, hey, maybe we don't put this guy in charge of anything to do with providing documentation that could possibly get people out of the country or anything like that. We should probably just be safe. We know that he's Austrian, so he has people around the area know who he is if he's the bishop of that diocese, and that takes care of a large portion of Austria or even into Germany. Yeah, he has that information about the area and the locals, but at the same time, maybe just err on the side of caution and put another bishop in charge of that, because this guy ends up running this rat line system where all of a sudden word gets out to these fucking Nazis that are on the run for war crimes. And they're like, hey, did you know that there's this guy down in Rome that's actually kind of sympathetic and he helped this guy get away. So he's establishing this network of travel for these fucking Nazi war criminals to get down to him in Rome, to where he's then issuing these Red Cross sponsored travel visas. and
Travel
documents.
visas, not passports, travel visas.
Travel visas, and he's able to determine who gets those. He's supposed to be giving these to Jewish refugees or refugees of other countries that were, occupied by the Nazis, to provide them assistance to get to other countries to reunite with their families. And instead, maybe he's doing some of that. He would have to be doing something like that to keep the position. But at the same time, he's fucking sending people like, was it Mengele that ends up making it to Argentina?
There was a bunch of them. There was Mengele. There was the architect of the final
I'm gonna look up
solution.
who it was.
But to go along with Chris's point of what does get released and how it all works out, Pope Pius XII's notes that ended up being released included 16 million pages of materials that had been organized for the 13 years prior to the release. So they had 13 years to go through 16 million pages and choose what they wanted to release out of it. So this wasn't just like a spur of the moment, hey, we're just going to go ahead and release this so you guys can see everything. This was 13 years in the making for them to be able to get through all these documents and decide this is what we're going to release, or maybe this is what we're going to lose.
Adolf Eichmann as well, the architect of the final solution. And then, Mengele, who was the angel of death at the concentration camp.
So you're going to dump 16 million pages worth of material onto, not the public, onto Catholic scholars that are allowed to view this stuff. And then from there, that's where the information will matriculate out into the public that we end up finding out about.
Yeah, there's a checks and balances for the dissemination of the info, and definitely not all of it's getting out.
Yeah, we're
the stuff that made it in there. You know, how many things didn't make it in there? Because didn't they also have, there was this, an agreement signed early on, I want to say it was in 33 or 34, that the Vatican actually signed with the Nazis. Keep going, I'll look it up real quick.
So you have to try to figure out of these 16 million pages worth of material what you're going to find. If it took them 13 years of a large group of people to organize this stuff, it's going to take a hell of a lot longer for somebody to try to comb through to try to find exactly what they're looking for, either proof that he was more sympathetic to the Nazi side or proof that he was more sympathetic to the atrocities that were going on. So we may not know for a very, very long time. But just the thought of them pushing it out early is great. I'm glad that they wanted to do it to clear it up, but they pushed out just such a massive information that it's almost impossible to...
I don't think it was benevolency that dictated them releasing that early.
But at least it's better than them just saying, no, we're not going to release any of it.
No, that's true. But again, it's the filter in which that information is being released to everybody. So it was called the Reichskonkordat, or simply the Concordat. It was signed July 20th of 1933, basically guaranteed the rights of the Catholic Church in Germany. So basically they were like, hey, we want to go ahead and stay here because, again, we're making that sweet, sweet money off you guys, those Reichsmarks. In exchange, we'll go ahead and give you the diplomatic recognition of your new Nazi government.
Oh, so they recognize the Nazi government. That's nice. I'm sure that couldn't go bad.
Why else can you think of any other reason why they would recognize a fascist regime?
Because they're fighting a communist regime.
And what was the danger of communism to the Catholic Church?
Communism stripped God out of society is what was going on at the time, because you had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, you had Vladimir Lenin coming to power, and you start to see the deletion of churches inside of Russia and a slow bleeding of the religious blood that's in that country. And you have Catholic people in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
You got people that are paying you money in Russia. So you got to be able to fight that somehow. And it just, I mean, they may not have been buddies, but they both had a similar foe.
Yeah.
The enemy is my friend. To go along with these archives, like Chris said, 53 miles, 85 kilometers of shelving, 35,000 volumes in just a selective catalog. So 35,000 volumes of the catalog of everything that's in there. So not even everything that's in there, just the selected things that they put in there that you can go try to find in the archives if you're allowed access.
If you happen to be allowed access, and this isn't something saying like anyone can just walk in, if you are allowed access, it is not just like, okay, here you go. Here's this section. Here's this section. I'm just going to be outside the door. Just knock on it when you want to get out. No, it is, we're going to see you into this room. What exactly do you want to view? You pick out something out of the catalog. I want this. You are given just that. It is just that specifically. So to even go in there, what do you go in there and say? Like, first of all, a normal person just wanting to ask questions is not going to be allowed in there. Secondly, even if someone was curious and walked in there and it's like, I want all the Nazi stuff. And they're like, we don't, what?
Yeah, what Nazi stuff?
Remember, we were against all that. We don't have any type of like Nazi stuff. Ew.
We might have a hat laying around or something like that, but beyond that, no. But that's got to be in a computer now, right? That has to be all computerized?
I would imagine to a degree, but I think that
Take a goddamn
anything that is
supercomputer.
those ancient tomes and documents and stuff, I think it's been backed up, but I don't think any of that is getting rid of.
But even the catalogs to try to find stuff, that has to have all been put in a computer.
Probably going forward, but they still have all of the catalogs from when they actually had to do it, like hard copies, I'm guessing.
Some of the stuff that we do know that's in there, pretty fun stuff. Henry VIII's request for a marriage annulment, pretty historic. Even more historic, the transcript.
Just the one?
It must have been
Just
the
one of
first.
Henry's?
Well, he had to ask for permission the first time, and then he had to ask for forgiveness after that.
There you go.
A transcript of Galileo's trial for heresy. Galileo went on trial for heresy because he said that the world wasn't the center of the universe. That's why he was considered a heretic.
He's a witch.
Because planet Earth wasn't the center of the universe.
Listen, we're civilized here. We don't just burn you for believing crazy stuff, but we will put you on trial so then we can have an excuse to get rid of you.
I believe I saw that there were handwritten letters to the Pope from Mary Queen of Scots when she was trying not to be killed by her cousin Elizabeth.
Yeah, when she was like already arrested or something like that. She was trying to get a papal pardon or some shit.
And maybe the funniest thing of all, I don't know why you'd even keep this, but letters and bills from Michelangelo for work inside the Sistine Chapel. Is that just proof that he was the one that did it?
Pay the fucking man. Maybe they were late on payments and he's just like, okay, that also leads into this next thing they were going to be talking about as well, because maybe they weren't too good about paying people because this led to something funny as shit that happened.
Yeah, it turns out that there's a better than good chance that inside this Vatican Apostolic archive, there might be loads of porn.
Like a lot of porn. There is porn that is known to be in there. Now, again, this is speculation. Why would you just have a big library of porn? I mean, you can't marry, you're probably lonely, you're probably pent up. Why would you need porn? They also have computers now, so.
This is it, though. This should be the solution. If you're not going to let them marry, just give them all the porn they want.
Have you seen the Chinese fuck dolls nowadays? That can't be breaking. That's not alive.
What's wrong with these guys just squeezing little pontiff from time to time, or feeding the geese, or choking the chicken, anything like that? Just let them take care of it that way. Give them all this old ancient porn that's sitting in the archives. Pat
the papal?
Yeah. Let them take care of that.
One thing that we're pretty certain is in there is back in 1523, a guy named Julio Romano, he painted a series of 16 panels depicting men and women in different sexual positions in the Pope's apartment for payback for not being paid
on time.
So stands to reason that maybe Michelangelo was like, well, I guess Michelangelo wasn't around at that time, but maybe they had a habit of not paying people, and that's why Michelangelo had to send in their bills for him. But so imagine it, Pope's apartment, you have these 16 frescoes, all showing people fucking in different positions. Basically, it's the Catholic Kama Sutra, is what it is.
I think I might be able to draw 4 panels. 16 panels seems like a lot of panels.
That's a year's worth of different positions.
You're getting into like Amazonian style and reverse pile drive. You think there was pile driver in the Pope's apartment?
There could have been. I mean, you start running into the teens and you're going to start running low on not only positions, but positions that you can draw, because some of them would probably be pretty confusing. After this was discovered, of course, they got to cover this shit up, but not before another artist was able to make his way in and sketch down all of Romano's frescoes and put them into a 16-page pamphlet, which was known as the 16 Pleasures. And these were sketched by Mark Antonio Ramundi. And this was it wasn't like it was mass printed like a newspaper or anything like that. But basically, this thing was made into multiple copies and kind of privately distributed to some of the people like around Rome and everything. Well, kind of like, was it Jim? It was Jim that had them go out and try to buy up all the newspapers when that article came out. Same thing here. Vatican tries to collect all the pamphlets over the next 100 years. And evidently, they're pretty successful because only one copy is supposedly left in existence, and it's on display where?
British Museum in London.
Fuck yes. And they have it displayed, but they have like the salacious bits blurred out, which, come on, those are the best bits. Show us what Julio wanted us to see.
Well, we see it in Roman architecture. We see it in statues. Like, give us what we want.
Do you think that's kind of a flex against the church to have that? And it just pisses them off.
Yeah.
Like if anybody comes in, like the Pope ends up making a tour around London and like, hey, everyone needs to see the British Museum.
You want to see the Catholic exhibit?
Yeah, let's go through that. And as they're walking through, you don't say anything. You just walk him past the book. And as he just walks past, you could see him like actually not want to look at it. And they're like, oh, I always forget this part. Sorry, we're going to come back here and look at this pamphlet. You probably haven't seen this as the Pope, but this used to be what decorates your apartment.
Yeah. It's just awesome.
You see one Pope just sitting there and he's staring at it. He just looks at the guy and he's like, I would actually like my apartment a lot more if this was actually, would you do me a favor? Are you able to print me out a copy of this and I can maybe have someone redo this in my apartment?
Pope archives. Or you know what? Just plug it into an AI search or an AI generator, see what comes up.
Yeah.
Maybe gussy it up. Give me from this century, something like that.
Again, another request. If you guys could actually generate what you believe would be the 16 Pleasures, make sure that you make them in the style of, the Renaissance style and everything. But please, be creative and send those to us as well.
This must have been a more common thing because even before Giulio Romano did the 16 Pleasures, there was another painter named Raphael that worked in 1519.
Was it the Raphael?
There's a lot of Ninja Turtles in this.
That's who Master Splinter names them after all the great Renaissance masters. You have Donatello, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael.
I thought it was Donatello Versace.
No, that's Donatella Versace.
Oh, shit, that's right. But he painted a bathroom in the papal apartments it was one of the bishops that had lived there too. And he put these erotic frescoes on the wall called the Staffetta della Bibliana. And that translates into he was a cardinal, the small heated room of Cardinal Bibliana. And these stayed up. They were up for a long period of time in this bathroom before finally, when they came in and did renovations, they just painted over the top of them.
I see this being a situation where that was the one that was done first. And then all of a sudden, this guy does the one in the Pope's apartment, and there's just this fucking outrage running up and down the halls. They've desecrated the fucking Pope's apartment. There's people fucking all over the walls. And he's like, what? No, that's horrible. And they only got the Pope's apartment, it sounds like. All right, everyone's good except the Pope's apartment. No need to search anywhere else.
I need to go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm. He's trying to cover it with a fucking blanket.
No, don't take him down.
This is all I have.
Just to end on this inquisition into the pornographic materials that might be in the archives, there was a guy named Father Boyle. He worked in the archives in the 80s and 90s. He searched for the collection. He was said to have asked if there was any pornography from one of the other people that was doing the organizing down there. They said, no, we have no idea what you're talking about. And he was then dismissed in 1997 for illegally selling rights to images within the archive. What would you be selling the rights to images from the archive of? Maybe some porn?
The good stuff.
Yeah. It's odd that happened. He didn't get to tell a whole lot of his story because he dies 2 years after he's dismissed. That we can't really tie to the Catholic Church. I think that was just a life that wasn't lived healthily. But
That's a man who spent a lot of years down in that archive with those images.
He's got some hairy palms, my friend. He's been busy down there. When they probably found him, he was partially dehydrated, and they found him in a dark corner down there. He was
He
like
actually gone blind. That's where it comes from, because it was in the dark for so long. When they flicked on the lights, he's like, I can't see.
It wasn't
like, see, touching your dick makes you go blind.
a little causation effect there. That when I think about him, I think about when Charlie finds Dennis's erotic diaries.
Yes. Dennis Reynolds' in Erotic Life.
But overall, just so many mysteries, so much going on inside of the smallest country in the world. It's so surprising to learn just how the whole system works inside the Vatican. We really only scratch the surface. There's so much more to get into, but it kind of starts getting into just the Catholic religion itself. And we want to figure out how one day to do an episode on just one of the biggest religions in the world, and that's going to be tough. But also, it does make me feel a little uncomfortable, and you and I talked about this during studying, to know that the head of a church that has 1.2 billion followers, something like that, it might even be a bigger number now, is completely confined in a country that they set the rules in that they own.
Has almost complete immunity.
Yeah.
For anything, is above reproach in the eyes of all of his followers, basically. Unless you get one of those popes that comes in and it's like, yeah, fuck it, gay people are cool, they're fine, I don't give a shit. And then everyone's just like, outrage!
And then you gotta quit.
And then you got a pope that comes in and it's like, you know what? Honestly, there might be something to science stuff, and everyone's like, fuck you! But, I mean, if you guys want to look into some more information, there's some stuff we didn't cover. There's this thing called the 3 Secrets of Fatima. It's kind of interesting. Basically what it is these 3 kids in Portugal basically had this vision back in like the early...
1917.
Late 18?
1917.
In 1917, these 3 small children had this vision of seeing an angel, basically got all the town folk out. They didn't see it at first, and then all of a sudden they stared into the sun. They saw the sun bouncing around the sky, which, yeah, if you actually stare at the sun, you have to close your eyes and start moving your head, and you see the sunspots moving around. But they came up with these. They said the angel told them 3 secrets. And this girl that heard these, she was one of the ones that actually survived into adulthood. The other 2 kids died pretty quickly after, one of the Spanish flu and one of something else.
Both Spanish.
Yeah, both Spanish. So she ends up becoming a nun. She dictates these 3 secrets. They're completely held by the Vatican and then released kind of periodically, but after the fact of something like major happening in the world. But then they'll release it and then like make it sound like it applied directly to that, when in reality it could have applied to a whole bunch of other different things, or it could have just been completely doctored. But just the fact that they actually like came out and would have like press conferences like, we're releasing the 3rd secret of Fatima, and would actually do like a conference where people could hear this kind of stuff. It's things like that that kind of work against the believability and legitimacy of something like this, especially something so big. But
to each their own. So
yeah, keep it interesting.
Yeah. At least they have that feather in their cap. Is this was wildly interesting to look into.
Mm-hmm. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those 2, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.